Hey guys, welcome to today's video. So I'm going to be reviewing the Mizuno irons of this year and yesteryear. So we've got the JPX range 921 and we've got the Mizuno Pro range as well from this year. So I'm going to be using the components from the fitting cot. We're going to be comparing all of the Mizuno heads available to me. So that's going to be the 221, 223, 225. It's going to be the JPX, it's going to be the 921, Tour, Forged, Hot Metal Pro and Hot Metal. I've got them all saved here on Foresight. We're going to keep all the data. Then we'll start to take out some outliers and we'll look at how they compare on a pretty average golf shot. And the shaft that I'm going to be using today, I was considering which shaft to use, whether the one that I game, but I've not been playing too much recently because of some restrictions in Hong Kong. So at the moment we're going to go for the Tour 120S in the Modus 3. So this is just something that's kind of mid to low launch, mid spin. I was toying with the X100, which I play at the moment, but I just felt this would be a little bit easier to hit on a day like today. One thing I'd also like to say, most golfers who are considering Mizuno irons, they normally come in with Mizuno in mind. So they say, look, I want to be fit for Mizuno irons. So Mizuno have got quite a fan following for being very good feeling players golf clubs, and it's really well earned as well. But what I would say that if we go back to the 90s, Mizuno irons had this really good feel, and I feel that Mizuno were performing somewhere up here and every other manufacturer were performing much more subpar unless you start to go into like Miura. However, over time, other manufacturers have started to use different manufacturing techniques or different components in materials to build their clubs, and the feel of many rivals has started to increase. So Mizuno's have improved, but I think the gap is starting to get smaller and smaller now, and the feel on Mizuno's isn't quite as legendary as it was back in the 90s, maybe early 2000s. So Mizuno golf clubs really are very good feeling clubs. However, I think there's better clubs out there. I'm also going to be using a Pro V1, Pro V1X today as well for all the shots and the fitting. So I'm going to keep some consistency in there, try and keep it as accurate as possible. And I'm just going to try and hit some shots and see what comes out and give some feedback on all of these golf clubs today. We've got the JPX range, the 921, so it's 2021 range of irons from Mizuno, and they've been replaced or upgraded by the Mizuno Pro range, which came out in 2022. However, the Mizuno Pro range is a completely different range to the JPX, and they've got different goals in mind. So typically when you look at a JPX iron, it's designed to go a long way, so it's a Mizuno iron with more distance in mind. When you look at a Mizuno Pro head, it's more catering for a better player on paper. So Mizuno Pro heads are typically forged, whereas when you start going into the JPX range, they're typically cast. However, the Tour is forged and the Forged is forged. But then when we look at the Hot Metal Pro and the Hot Metal, these are both cast offerings. In the Mizuno range, we go forged, 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 asterisk, because although this Mizuno Pro 225 is forged, it's a hollow head construction, so most people associate forged clubs with better feel. However, when you look at the Mizuno Pro in the 225, because it's a hollow head construction, you're going to get a slightly different feel to a pure blade, or even maybe the 223. And I'll talk about that when I'm starting to hit some shots as well. In terms of having a look at rivalries, I think the Tour and the 221 are going to go head to head, both 34 degrees in a 7-iron, so pretty traditional lofts nowadays. And then when we start to look at the Mizuno Pro versus the JPX 921 forged, there's a 31 degree 7-iron versus a 32. So it's 1 degree stronger is going to help add potentially 2 to 5 yards more distance. And then again, the Hot Metal Pro versus the Mizuno Pro, the 225. When we look at those, we've got a 30 degree 7-iron in the 225. We've got a 29 degree when we start looking at the Hot Metal Pro. Now the Hot Metal, this is the outlier. The Hot Metal Standard. This one, 29 degree aloft, it's cast. It doesn't seem like what people associate Mizuno with. It's not really a better player's club. It's not designed to feel better, but it's just Mizuno's offering it, giving a club for a lower skilled golfer who needs more forgiveness, needs more distance. So the Hot Metal, it does have a purpose. It's just not what you typically associate with Mizuno. More people, when they think of Mizuno, they're looking at something like the Mizuno Pro, which may throw them back to something like the MP60 range from years back, or the Mizuno Pro 221, which is very much similar to something like the MP33s or the MP5s or potentially the TP9s, depending on how far back in time you want to go. First up, 921 Tour. So I'm going to start last year's model. I'm going to take it on pretty hard. So how it'll look, I'll go 921 Tour, then I'll go into the Forge, then we'll go Hot Metal Pro, then we'll go Hot Metal. And then I'll see if I feel that difference jumping from cast into the Mizuno Pro range. So let's give it a go. Okay, so I've hit a handful of shots now with the JPX Tour, and I actually really appreciate the feel. They do feel really good irons, but in my own game, and this is very personal to each player that walks in, I'm more of a performance player than a feel player, so I don't mind sacrificing that little bit of feel if I get clubs that end up going on the green more often. So that'd be my own personal approach to selecting golf clubs: performance, feel later. So now it's time for the JPX 921 Forged. Very popular golf club last year. I had a lot of students that were really interested in the 921 Forged. I would say some of them didn't quite have the skill they needed for these clubs, but they were really attractive, well marketed. A lot of people really wanted to hunt these down. And if I look at kind of a long-term review, I think I got quite a few golfers around that 15 to 18 handicap range, maybe even beyond 18, that had their heart set on JPX Forged. So when doing a fitting, of course, you want to try and find the best performing club for the student, but also the student really rules, and they're really king in saying, look, this golf club is what I want. So sometimes a student comes in, they know what club they want, they just want to find the best shaft combination, grip combination, loft and lie for that golf club. So the 921 Forged, a lot of students went for this last year. Some of them did regret that purchase a little bit later. They wish they'd gone for a more forgiving model. Oh, very nice. I like the feel. I know I pulled that one, but I like the feel. I will say already it's a bit of a meatier head, and I think that contributes to it feeling even better than the 921 Forge. The 921 Tour. I'm just trying to put nice, easy swings on these. So, quick review on that one. I would argue the feel on this one is better than the Tour head, maybe because it's a little bit meatier, and when I don't hit it out the middle, the performance still seems to be pretty good. And I wanted to hit a lot of shots with this golf club. I mean, when I hit it out the middle, and actually going back to when these clubs came out, I remember my review, and this was the one club that made me want to keep hitting it, and I looked on the bottom and was like, what club is this? I like it, I want to keep going. So what this does, it actually excites me for when I try the Mizuno Pro 223, because that's going to offer some forgiveness. It's going to be weaker loft. This might be a very expensive review for me because I might end up considering a new set of irons, but my AP2s are pretty hard to get out of my hands at the moment. Hot Metal Pro, what do I expect? 29 degrees of loft. I expect this is going to go the longest on test until I then hit the Hot Metal. But Hot Metal Pro, it's supposed to be a little bit more forgiving than the Tour, but it's not forged. Do we lose feel? Do I notice a difference in feel? Or have Mizuno got to a point where the technology in the head can kind of cover that feel difference? Let me try. Ooh, left. Okay guys, so I've hit the Hot Metal Pro. I've got my own opinions on this one. It didn't excite me. I missed more to the left. Maybe that's part of me being a little bit upset by the performance of this one. But it didn't feel as good. The first shot I hit didn't feel great, and then I looked up and I saw it had gone quite a long way. But it did seem, and this is only what I'm hearing, but the way it hit the net sounded louder, it sounded a bit more authoritative. It sounded like the ball speed was quicker, even though I wasn't trying to hit it any harder. So it did seem faster, but there was a huge feel difference. And I say I'm not a feel player, but now I'm considering how good those Mizunos felt compared to this one, which kind of contradicts my I prefer performance. But as a better player, what you want to do really is you want to make sure you've not got too strong a loft of golf club, because then you start to have a problem at the bottom end of the golf bag where your pitching wedge may go 150, but your gap wedge, your 52 degree wedge, only goes 120, and you've now got a 30-yard gap appear. And that's where manufacturers now are starting to put out gap wedge, approach wedge, all sorts of these made up wedges just to make up this gap that's now created because the pitching wedge goes too far. So this one for me, bit of a disappointment, doesn't feel like a Mizuno club, but I understand what it's marketed at. Maybe you want a lower cost Mizuno iron, but if that's the case, why not just go buy a different brand and get a higher performing club from somebody else? But for me, Hot Metal Pro doesn't really score too many points, but let's see how much weaker it is than the equally lofted 29 degree Hot Metal. What's the difference? So I've mentioned I've got my own prejudice towards these clubs. A Hot Metal, it's not forged, It's not really a Mizuno iron, how I see an iconic Mizuno iron, but that's not what it's intended to be, and it doesn't disguise the fact that it isn't a Mizuno forged Better Players club. But what it's very good at, it's actually quite strong lofted, and from what I remember in fittings, it's actually pretty powerful too. So for some golfers who need a little bit more distance and struggle with a higher ball flight, this was a real good one at knocking that launch angle down and getting the ball speed up. So, my turn to try. And again, even though it's a bigger head, I don't think it's a bad looking golf club. I think it still looks pretty nice behind the ball. Good swings, Mike. Same kind of sound. It's definitely a different sound from these Mizuno irons. So I think what I can say on this club, it actually, even when I don't hit it well, it still flies pretty well. It's really easy to hit. It's not a bad club, but it tends to be a lower launching club. It tends to be a lower spinning club. Okay, now I'm going to have to wake up again because I'm going into the 221 Mizuno Pro, a little bit smiling on my face because I'm going to be exposed when I hit this one pretty bad. And I've just gone from the hot metal, which was super big, super forgiving, and now I'm going into something like the Mizuno Pro. Wish me luck. But again, yeah, 34-degree aloft, forged head, forged in Hiroshima, so that must be better. But yeah, Japanese forged Mizuno Pro iron 221, and it's going to hurt my fingers if I hit this cold on a winter day in the UK. But fortunately I'm in Hong Kong and winter goes down to around 14 degrees, so it's not too bad. Here goes. Nice. I hit that one well. Can we stop the review? I'm done. No more. I don't need to hit too many more of these. Now, I didn't hit all of these from the middle. I think I hit one 9mm from the toe, so almost a centimetre from the toe, and the performance was still pretty good. So as blade iron comes, actually it's not far off being quite a forgiving club. Would I still want to put it in a 5 handicapper's hand? Probably not. It's doing what I expected. I could already see it starting to drop short. It'll be good to see how it compares to the 921 Tour in a moment, but 34 degrees, it's almost a club shorter than some of the other clubs that we've tried, like the Hot Metal Pro and the Hot Metal. Really nice. There's not much to say. It's a really, really nice golf club, but better players only, really. This is the Mizuno Pro 223, which I'm pretty excited to test out. It's going to really compare to the JPX 921 Forge, which I really liked. However, this head does seem a little bit smaller, a little bit less forgiving. We might see that. So let's give it a go and let's see how this one performs. But pretty excited. It's got the 921 to beat. Okay, not a bad hit. A little bit of a push out right. So 223, how did it play? How did it perform? Well, I quite liked it. Maybe I'm a little bit more excited about the 921 Forge. So if you've got the 921 Forge you were considering upgrading, you probably don't need to. The 921 Forged, maybe a little bit more forgiving, a little bit softer feeling, dare I say. But the 223 is really good, really soft feeling iron. It's hard for me to kind of pick a softer feeling club out of the 221 and the 223. I think they're on par with each other. They've got a slightly different feeling, but neither of them feels worse than the other. They just feel a little bit different. The 221 feels a little bit more solid. This one feels like I could hit it a little bit off the toe and still get away with it a little bit more. But out the middle, they're pretty equal to each other. So last one on test, you've heard my kind of critical analysis of this golf club. It's forged, but is it really forged because it's hollow? Is it really what you expect from a forged club? Does it feel the same? Does it sound the same? Let's give it a go. Let's see where it fits. But it should be in kind of par with the Hot Metal Pro. Not so much the Hot Metal, but more the Hot Metal Pro. Potentially like a better feeling version of that. In terms of looks, I could just say this for every Mizuno iron out there. They look pretty nice. Everything. You don't stare down at a Mizuno iron and say, wow, that looks really ugly. So one thing Mizuno do is make very nice looking classic golf clubs. Okay guys, so final one, 225, just hit it. How does it feel? Okay. It's not gonna kind of change your world like the 223 or the 221 or the forged JPX 921 would. However, it's not a bad iron. It's fairly consistent iron, reliable, you can hit it off the toe, you still get some play from it. If it was a battle between do I want the 223 or the 225, if you're a good ball striker, go for the 223, you might lose a little bit of yardage, and we'll look at the data in a moment. If it's a kind of, do I go for last year's model, do I go for this year's model, and you're considering the Hot Metal Pro versus the 225, go for the 225. It's a better club. Long term, you'll appreciate that decision. Not only does it look better in the golf bag, looking at something that looks more like a blade than the cavity, it feels better too, and I think the performance is at least on par with that 223, the 921 Hot Metal Pro range. So let's start to look at the data. So guys, now you've got me, you've got the data, let's have a look at that. I've managed to hit 48 shots, a bit of hard work for me today, but let's have a look at what the golf clubs performed like, and also talk about what I'm going to delete. So first thing I'm going to do, I'll go into the data and I'll export the raw data, and I'll make this available for anybody that wants this data. So first of all, we'll look at the data. Let's take this, and I've not deleted anything as we look at it right now. I'm going to go straight into this table, and the first thing that I'm going to do is jump into the comparison. So what we'll start with, we'll have a look at all the 921 irons. Now, bearing in mind, this is just raw data. So you'll know if you've watched my previous videos, any shot that goes to the left, it's going to be lower launch, it's going to be lower spin. Shots that go to the right typically will be higher launch, higher spin. So this is where it's good to take out really wild outliers. Now, of course, if you get one club that you just totally don't perform with, maybe you need to take that into consideration. So it isn't all about making the data pretty, but it's really that one or two wild shots can skew that data so much that it leads you into a different shaft or a different head. So if we look at this, and there's all of the ball flights, we just bring that up on the side there, all of the ball flights, you can see something like this really low yellow one there. That's one that I'm clearly going to take out of the data. But yeah, let's go back into the average on that. When we start to look at just some of the numbers, ball speed would be lower on the Tour, a little bit better on the Forge, a bit better on the Hot Metal Pro, and then ultimately the fastest on the Hot Metal. So well done me, pat on the back. I managed to get them to perform the way that they should. Then we start to look at the launch angle, and again, yep, 17 degrees, 15 degrees. Hot Metal Pro launched a little bit lower, but we saw that yellow line that was really low. That's how it can skew the data, so we'll start to look at that too. Maybe I then lose a pat on the back when the Hot Metal Pro outperforms the Hot Metal, but I'm at risk. And then you can see just little numbers in there, the spin, the high spin in the weaker lofted clubs, we kind of expect that. And then if we go into the other comparison, so we get rid of this data, we start to have a look at the Pro range. Let's see if I was able to replicate that. No, I wasn't. I actually performed better with the 223 than I did the 225. But again, 118, 119, 119, distance was a little bit tighter. So it does seem like the Mizuno Pro range is a little bit more on top of each other, maybe leading itself into being a more of a combo set where you could start to go, okay, I'm going to get the 223 head, but I might make the long irons 225. Or it might be a 221 player, but make the long irons 223. That'd be quite an interesting way to play, and that'd be a good way for you to adjust that set and make it more customized to you. That'd be more of the Pro range, rather than the JPX range, which is one set of clubs for one set of players. So going back into this, we'll just have a look at the all data. Yep, all the ball flights are a little bit mixed. So time, you've seen the raw data, nothing hidden. Now you get to see what I do every time, and I just start chopping all the bad shots out. So go on, have a guess. I hit, how many shots was that? 49? 48 shots, so let's call it 50. What percentage do you think I'm going to get rid of? I think I did all right. So let's have a look. What shall I delete? So we'll start at the top and we go into the 9214. So what I typically do is anything that's really offline, and I'm going to just scour through the results and see what I consider as being really far offline for this test. And then we'll start deleting the shots that fall outside of that. And then secondly, we'll start looking at the ball speed and the launch angle. Anything that's really an anomaly in terms of the launch angle or the ball speed, we'll delete that too to try and get the fairest data. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. So if I look at the 921 Tour, 9 degree offline would be my wildest. That's not bad. But then when we start to get into the 92 Forge one, we've got one that's 19 degrees to the left. So that's a straightaway delete for me. Okay, I'll just do the compare again, check out the all. Yep, much better. And now what we'll do from there, we'll just export the data one more time. Let's have a look at the 921 range. So now we've taken out the real wild shots in there. We start to see the hot metal Pro actually perform pretty equal. The spin rate, the launch angle, there's not too much to decide between those two, apart from the hot metal itself was around 400 RPMs lower backspin. So you get a little bit more of a penetrating ball flight, might give you a little bit more roll, maybe a better club to have in your long irons if you're looking at trying to get a backup club. You like to play 4 irons off the tee, but maybe not so good if you like to chase second shots into a par 5. In terms of the 921 Forge, really nice club, but the difference between the 921 Tour and the hot metal, 4 mile an hour, roughly one club. So all in all, there's not a huge difference in ball speed. However, when you start looking at the backspin, you compare almost 7,000 down to 5,000. That's going to be a big difference in what changes that carry distance from 162 to 173. That spin rate is going to be a big factor in there, second to the ball speed. So looking at what they do, and we look at the difference between the Tour and the Forge, the biggest difference you'll see, not so much the ball speed, but more the spin rate. So you might find it a little bit more difficult to have that combo set when you start looking at the 921 irons. And especially when you start then jumping from the 921 Forge and maybe go into the hot metals, you can see there's a huge difference. Again, like kind of 800 RPM spin. The same jump that you get from the blades to the forged, from the Tour to the forged, you get from the forged to the hot metal. So it can make that combo set a little bit difficult. And then all in all, you can see the data there, 162 carry versus a 173. Having a look at the Pro range, these are much more on top of each other. I actually hit the 223 a little bit better than the 225, and I felt that. But the launch angle, all pretty similar. The spin rate, not too dissimilar. So what I would say with the Mizuno Pro range is they're more on top of each other. The irons are less dissimilar between models, which means you could combo them if you wanted. I suppose in a way you could almost have all ranges in one bag. You could almost have the 225 pre-iron, maybe a 2-iron, 3-iron, 4-iron, and you could start to go into kind of the 223s in the middle of the bag, and you could go for the 221s at the bottom end of the bag if you really want to. And the difference between them are 165 to 169, there's not much. So the Mizuno Pro range for better players, giving you more customization on how you want that bag to be laid out, I think that's pretty sweet. I think that's pretty nice. So 921 Tour versus the Pro 221, which compared, we've got 1 year advancement from Mizuno. Was there a big battle in feel? I think they both felt great. It was really hard for me to kind of pick a difference between the two, maybe because I hit so many shots in between, but they felt pretty similar. But again, launch angle 921 Tour, a little bit higher launch, a little bit more backspin, and a little bit less distance in total. So the 921 Tour just seemed to be that little bit shorter, but not noticeably. I think on another day they could be on top of each other. On another day, maybe the Pro 221 would be a little bit of a longer iron. 921 Forge versus a Pro 223. Now, I don't want to look at the data just yet, but my opinion on this one was the 223 for me. I wanted to love it, I really did, because I like the 921 Forge. I was thinking, oh well, the 223 is going to be a better version of this. How did it perform? Well, it did a little bit better actually. They're rivals. They're on top of each other, kind of how I predicted it. Again, on any given day, the 921 Forge, the Pro 221, the ball speed's within 1 mile an hour, the launch angle's within just over a half a degree, the backspin's within 100 RPMs, the carry distance is within a yard. They're almost twins. And if I pull up all the data on those shots, again, they're pretty similar. I could even potentially knock that 921 out, which would give it a little bit of a longer distance. But both great clubs. I think if you're battling out between, do you want the 921 Forged, I'd say that felt a little bit more forgiving for me, and it probably felt a little bit more solid because of the bigger head. But you're splitting hairs. Those clubs are really almost identical. Okay, final one, and one thing that shouts out to me is that rainbow is far huger than all the other irons that I've compared today. But yeah, Hot Metal Pro, Pro 225, this is how I saw those as rivals. Ball speed again within 1 mile an hour, launch angle on top of each other, backspin on top of each other, side angle on top of each other, carry on. They're basically the same club rebadged, but they perform pretty well. So it's really, it's down to a personal preference. I think if you wanted to get a good bargain, you could buy the JPX range from last year. And I would say the JPX range tend to be a little bit more forgiving, but then if you want a little bit potentially better feel, or you want more of a player's version, you want to be able to combo that set a little bit better, then I'd start to have a look at the you tell me, 221s, 223s, 225s.